Good morning, Millbank. We've got our final chapter from the Firework-Maker's Daughter. Let's finish it off today, eh? The invited firework makers arrived the next day together with all the other famous artists and performers. The Chinese Scout and Guide Opera Company, Senor Archibaldo Gomez and his Filipino Mambo Orchestra, the Norwegian National Comedy Cowbell Players, and many others. They all disembarked from the SS Indescribable with their luggage and their instruments and their costumes and began to rehearse at once. The first firework maker was Dr. Puffin Flash from Heidelberg. He had invented a multi-stage rocket which exploded at a height of 2,000 feet into the shape of a gigantic Frankfurter sausage, while a huge instrument he invented played the Ride of the Valkyrie. Herr Puffinflash had gone to immense trouble to prepare something just as spectacular for the New Year festival, and he supervised the unloading of his enormous equipment with scrupulous care. The second visiting firework maker was Signor Scorsini from Naples. His family had been making fireworks for generations, and his speciality was noise. For this display, he had invented a full-scale representation of a battle at sea, featuring the noisiest fireworks in the world, and with King Neptune emerging from the water to see fair play and declare peace. The third and last firework maker was Colonel Sam Sparkington from Chicago. His display was called the greatest fireworks show in the galaxy, and it usually featured Colonel Sparkington himself, wearing a white Stetson hat and riding a horse. This time it was rumoured he had invented an especially exciting display involving something never before seen in the art of pyrotechnics. And while the three visiting firework makers were assembling their displays, Lalshand and Leela were working on theirs. Time flew past. They barely slept. They scarcely washed. They hardly ate. They mixed vats of golden serpents. They ordered 1.5 tons of flowers of salt. They invented something so new neither could think of a name for it until Leela said, "Foaming," and snapped her fingers. "Moss?" said Lalshand. "That's it." Leela showed Lalshand her delayed fuse method, but it didn't work until he thought of adding some spirits of saltpetre. And then it worked magnificently. It would let them set off 50 or 100 fireworks at once, which had previously been impossible. Then Lalshand came up with a spectacular finale, but it depended on something even more impossible: burning a fuse underwater. Leela solved that by thinking of caustic naphtha, and they tried it, and it worked. And before they knew it, the day of the festival arrived. "I wonder where Chilek is," Leela said vaguely, but her mind was really on the foaming moss. "I hope Hamlet's been treated well," said Lalshan, but he was really thinking about the caustic naphtha. And neither of them said anything about the king's decision, but they couldn't get it out of their minds. After a hasty sleep and a hurried breakfast, they loaded up the fried prawn seller's cart. He lent it them because he was taking the day off, and trundled it through the streets of the royal park, where the displays were going to take place. The batik seller followed them behind with another cart, and behind him came the sandalwood carver from down the street with a third, all laden with fireworks. But when they reached the ornamental lake, Leela and Lalshan stopped in dismay, for there was Dr. Puffinflash supervising the final stages of putting together about 15 tons of equipment, all swathed in a neat tarpaulin and swarmed over by a dozen pyrotechnicians in white overalls with clipboards and stethoscopes. And next to him there was Signor Scorsini, clambering about on a model galleon even longer than the royal barge, all bristling with cannons and flares, while his Neapolitan crew were arguing and gesticulating in a Neapolitan dialect as they lowered a vast nodding, bearded model of King Neptune below the water. And next to him, Colonel Sparkington was rehearsing his display. There was a gigantic red, white and blue rocket with a saddle on the back of it, and on a scaffolding platform high above the treetops there was a model of the moon with dozens of craters all being loaded with exciting looking things. It was too much. Lalshan and Leela looked at the vast displays being prepared by the other artists, and then at their 3 little cartloads, and their hearts sank. "Never mind," said Lalshand. "Ours is a good display, my love. Think of the foaming moss. They've got nothing like that." "Or the underwater fuses," said Leela. "Look, they're having to light that sea god by hand. We can do better than that, father." "Of course we can. Let's go to work." They unloaded their materials, and the batik painter and the sandalwood carver took their carts back with a promise of free tickets to the show. The day passed quickly. All the firework makers were very curious about one another's displays and kept wandering over to have a look with the excuse of borrowing a handful of red fire powder or a length of slow fuse. They came to look at Lalshan and Leela's, and they were very polite, but it was plain that they didn't think much of it. And all of them were desperate to look under Dr. Puffinflash's tarpaulin, but he kept it tightly tied down. Promptly at 7 o'clock, the sun went down, and 10 minutes later, it was dark. People were beginning to arrive already, with rugs to sit on and picnic baskets, and from the palace nearby came the sound of bells and gongs and cymbals. All the firework makers were busy in the dark, putting the finishing touches to their displays. They all wished one another good luck. Then came a roll of drums, and the palace gates were thrown open. By the light of 100 flickering torches, a great procession made its way to the grandstand by the lake. The king was being carried in a golden palanquin, and the royal dancers were swaying and stepping elegantly alongside. Behind them, decorated with gold cloths and jewels of every colour, with his tusks and toenails painted scarlet, came Hamlet. "Oh, look at the poor thing," said Leela. "He looks utterly miserable. I'm sure he's lost weight." "He's missing shellac. That's what it is," said Lalshand. Hamlet stood disconsolately behind the grandstand as the king declared the competition open. "A prize of a gold cup and 1,000 gold coins will be awarded to the winner," the king proclaimed. "Only your applause will decide who has won. The first contestant will now begin his display." The firework makers had drawn lots to see which order they would perform in. Dr. Puffinflash was first. Of course, the audience had no idea what to expect, and when his mighty rockets whizzed up into the night sky, his gigantic bombarding orgomastic compumpin began to play the Ride of the Valkyries, hurling out great lumps of Teutonic lava. They all burst into oohs and ahs of excitement. Then came the highlight of his display. Out of the darkness arose a tribute to the king's favourite dish, a gigantic pink prawn, fizzing and sputtering, which began to revolve faster and faster until it all went out in a shower of salmon-coloured sparks and a sonorous chord from the bombarding gumlets and spark and pump. The applause was colossal. "That was good," said Leela apprehensively. "That big prawn, really big and pink." "Bit too obvious," said Lalshand. "Don't worry. Nice pink though. Must ask him for the recipe." Next go was Signor Scorsini with his Neapolitan pyrotechnicians. Red, green and white rockets whizzed up in the air to explode with enormous bangs that echoed all around the city. And then the galleon came ablaze with sparklers and Catherine wheels, and a chorus of galley sleighs made of Roman candles moved their oars stiffly to and fro. Suddenly, A giant octopus rose up out of the water, waving ghastly green tentacles, and attacked the ship. The sailors fired all kinds of jumping jacks and whizzes and incandescent fountains at it, and then they tipped cascades of Greek fire over it from barrels lashed to the masts. The noise was indescribable. Just when it looked as if the ship was about to tip over, up came King Neptune, waving his trident, accompanied by 3 mermaids. The band struck up, and the mermaids sang a jolly Euro song called Boom Banga Bang. The octopus waved its tentacles in time, and more rockets went off in rhythm with the music. The audience loved it. They roared with delight. "Oh dear," said Lalshan. "That was very exciting. Oh dear, oh dear." "But didn't you see how they had to light the sea god?" Leela said. "They had to wait till he was right out of the water, and a little man in a boat reached up with a match. Just wait until they see our underwater fuse." When the applause had died down, Colonel Sparkington's display began. First, a lot of saucer-shaped fireworks whizzed down from the darkness and landed on the grass. That got a round of applause on its own, because fireworks usually went up, not down. Then the famous moon swung into view, way up above the treetops, and Colonel Sparkington galloped in on a white horse made of tiny Catherine wheels, waving his Stetson hat to the audience, who were in such a good mood that they cheered and cheered. Leela could see an official beside the king carefully counting the seconds that each burst of applause lasted. She swallowed hard. Then came the climax of Colonel Sparkington's display. After stamping out the flying saucers with his Catherine wheel horse, the gallant colonel jumped aboard the red, white and blue rocket. A Cherokee chieftain galloped in on a Palomino pony and fired a blazing arrow at the tail of the rocket, which ignited at once and whooshed up along a wire to the moon, with Colonel Sparkington waving his hat all the way. As soon as it landed, a dozen craters flipped open and out came some little round-faced moon people with big eyes and pointed ears. The audience went wild. The moon people waved the flags of all nations and bowed to the king. Colonel Sparkington distributed rockets to them all, and they whizzed off in all directions, singing a song called Sparkington Forever. You could hear the clapping, the cheering and whistling and stamping for miles around. Leela and Lalshan looked at each other. There was nothing to say, but then they hugged each other very tightly and ran to their places, and as soon as the audience was settled again, they began their display. The first thing that happened was that little lotus flowers made of white fire suddenly popped open on the water. With no hint of where the fire had come from, the audience fell silent. And when the flowers began to float across the dark lake like little paper boats, they were completely hushed. Then a beautiful green light began to glow beneath the water and rose slowly upwards to become a fountain of green fire. But it didn't look like fire. It looked like water, and it splashed and danced like a bubbling spring. And while the fountain played over the lake, something quite different was happening under the trees. A carpet of living moss seemed to have spread itself across the grass, a million little points of light, all so close together that they looked as soft as velvet. A sort of "ah" sound came from the audience. Then came the most difficult part. Leela had designed a sequence of fireworks based on what she had seen in the Grotto of the Fire Fiend, but it all depended on the delayed action fuses working as they should, and of course they hadn't had a time to test them properly. If some of the fireworks went off a second too early or a second too late, the whole show would make no sense. There was no time to worry about that now. Quickly and expertly, she and Lalshan touched fire to the end of the master fuses and held their breaths. First came a series of slow, dull explosions, like the beat of a muffled drum. Everything was dark. Then a red light shivered downwards, leaving a trail of red sparks hanging in the air, like a crack opening in the night. The solemn drum beats got louder and louder, and everyone sat very still, holding their breath, because of the irresistible feeling that something was going to happen. Then it did. Out of the red crack in the night, a great cascade of brilliant red, orange and yellow lava seemed to pour down and spread out like the carpet of fire in the grotto. Leah couldn't resist glancing up very swiftly at Dr. Puffinflash, Senor Scorsini and Colonel Sparkington, and saw them all watching wide-eyed like little children. When the lava carpet had flowed down almost to the edge of the lake, the speed of the drumbeat got faster, and sharp bangs and cracks beat the air between them, and suddenly, dancing as he had in the grotto, Razvani himself seemed to be there, whirling and stamping and laughing for joy in the play of the eternal fire. Both Leela and Lalshan forgot everything else and seized each other's hands and danced as well. Never had they produced such a display. No matter what had happened, it was worth it. Everything was worth it for a moment of joy like this. They laughed and danced for happiness. But their fire was not Razvani's, of course, and it couldn't last forever. The great red firework demon burnt himself out, and the last of the red lava slowly poured into the lake, and then the little white lotus boats, now scattered over the water like the stars in the sky, flared up and burnt more brightly than ever for a moment before all going out at once. Then there was silence. It was a silence that got longer and longer until Leela could hardly bear it, and she gripped Lalshan's hand so tightly it nearly cracked. And when she thought it was all over, Lalshan was doomed. Everything was ruined. There came a mighty yell from Colonel Sparkington. "Yee-haw!" he cried, waving his hat, and "Bravissimo!" shouted Signor Scorsini, clapping his hands above his head, and "Ha, ha, ha!" roared Dr. Puffinflash, seizing the cymbals from his bombarding Norglossum sparking pump in order to clap more loudly. The audience, not to be out-applauded by the visiting firework-makers, joined in with such a roar, and a stamping and a clapping and a thumping of one another on the back, and a whistling and a shouting that 438 doves roosting in a tree 10 miles away woke up and said, "Did you hear that?" Of course, the court official timing applause had to give up. It was obvious to everyone who had won, and Lalshan and Leela went up to the royal platform, where the king was waiting to present the prize. "I keep my word," the king said quietly. "Lalshand, you are free. Take this prize, the pair of you, and enjoy the festival." Hardly knowing what was happening, Leela and Lalshand wandered back to the darkness of the firing area under the trees. He might have been going to say something, and she might have spoken too, but suddenly the air was filled with the sound of a mighty trumpet. "It's Hamlet," said Leela. "Look, he's excited about something." A moment later, they saw what the elephant had seen, and Leela clapped her hands for joy. A little figure came strolling onto the grass in front of the royal platform and bowed elegantly to the king. It was Chelak. "Your Majesty," he said, and everyone stopped to hear what he was going to say. "In honour of your great wisdom and generosity to all subjects, and in celebration of your many glorious years on the throne, and in the hope of many even more glorious ones ahead, and as a tribute to the splendour of your courage and your dignity, and in recognition..." "He's on the verge of being cheeky," Lalshan said as Chelak went on. "I can see the king tapping his foot. That's a bad sign. So, Your Majesty," Chelak finished, "I have the honour to present to you a group of the finest musicians ever heard, who will sing a selection of vocal gems for your delight. Your Majesty, my lords, ladies, and gentlemen, Rambashi's Melody Boys." "I don't believe it," said Leela. But she had to, because there they were, Rambashi's ex-pirates in person, wearing smart scarlet jackets and tartan sarongs. Rambashi himself, beaming all over his broad face, gave a deep bow and prepared to conduct them. But before he could begin, there was an interruption. One of the dancing girls who had accompanied the royal procession from the palace suddenly squealed and cried, "Chang!" And one of the Melody Boys held out his arms and cried, "Lotus Blossom!" "What did he say?" said Lalshand. "Locust Bottom?" The young couple ran to each other with their arms outstretched, but stopped, embarrassed, as they realised that everyone was watching. "Well, go on," said the king. "You might as well." So they kissed shyly, and everyone cheered. "And now I'd like an explanation, please," said the king. "I was a carpenter, your Majesty," said Chang, "and I thought I ought to seek my fortune before I asked Lotus Blossom to marry me. So I went off and sought it, and that's what I'm doing here, your Majesty." "Well, you'd better start singing then," said the king. So Chang ran back to the Melody Boys, and Rambashi counted them in, and they began to sing a close harmony song called "Down by the Old Irwadi." "They're very good, aren't they?" said Lalshand. "I'm amazed," said Leela. "After all the trouble they've had finding the right thing to do, who would have thought it?" The song came to an end, and the king led the applause. While Rambashi was announcing the next, Leela went to talk to Jalak and found him stroking Hamlet's trunk. The elephant looked happy, but of course he couldn't say so with everyone around. "Have you heard?" said Jalak. "Hamlet's going to get married." "Oh, well done, by the way. We heard the racket they made when you won. I always knew you would. I've got my job back." Hamlet cuffed him gently around the head. "So Frangipan said yes?" said Leela. "Congratulations, Hamlet. I'm so pleased. What made her change her mind?" "Me," said Jalak. "I went and told her about his gallant deeds upon Mount Merapi, and she was conquered. Actually, she said she'd loved him all the time, but she hadn't liked to say so. Old Uncle Rambashi's doing well, isn't he?" The audience was clapping and cheering as Rambashi announced the next song. When the Melody Boys were singing and swaying to "Save the Last Mango for Me," Leela wandered back to Lalshand, who was in deep talks with the three other firework-makers. They all stood up politely and asked her to join them. "I was congratulating your pa on that mighty fine display," said Colonel Sparkington, "and half the credit goes to you, miss. That trick with the little bitty boats that all went out at once, that's a Lulu. How'd you work that stunt?" So Leela told them about the delayed action fuses, because there are no secrets among true artists. And Dr. Puffinflash told them the art of pink fire, and Signor Scorsini told them how he made the octopus legs wave. They all talked for hours and liked one another enormously. And very late, when they were extremely tired, and when even Rambashi's Melody Boys had run out of songs to sing, Leela and Lalshand found themselves alone in the great garden, on the grass under the warm stars, and Lalshand cleared his throat and looked embarrassed. "Leela, my dear," he said, "I've an apology to make." "Whatever for?" "Well, you see, I should have trusted you. I brought you up as a firework maker's daughter. I should have expected you to want to be a firework maker yourself. After all, you have the 3 gifts." "Oh yes, the 3 gifts. Resvani asked if I had them. I didn't know. But then he said I must have brought them after all. And what with rushing back to the city and preparing the display and worrying about whether we'd manage to save your life, I forgot all about them. And I still don't know what they are." "Well, my dear, did you see the ghosts?" said Lalshand. "Yes, I did. They didn't bring the gifts, and they failed. But what are the 3 gifts?" "They are what all firework makers must have. They're all equally important, and two of them are no good without the third. The first one is talent, and you have that, my dear. The second has many names: courage, determination, willpower. It's what made you carry on climbing the mountain when everything seemed hopeless. Leela was silent for a moment and then said, "What is the third?" "It's simply luck," he said. "It's what gave you good friends like Chelak and Hamlet and brought them to you in time. Those are the three gifts, and you took them and offered them to Razvani, as a firework maker should, and he gave you the royal sulphur in exchange." "But he didn't." "Yes, he did. He said it was an illusion. In the eyes of Razvani, no doubt it is, but human beings call it wisdom. You can only gain that suffering and risk by taking the journey to Mount Merapi. It's what the journey is for. Each of our friends, the other firework makers, has made his own journey in a similar way, and so has Rambashi. So you see, you didn't come home empty-handed, Leela. You did bring back the royal sulphur." Leela thought of Hamlet and Frangipan, now happily engaged. She thought of Chelak, restored to his job, and Chang and Lotus Blossom, restored to each other. She thought of Rambashi and the Melody Boys, happily snoring in the hotel in the Intercontinental, dreaming of the triumphant showbiz career that lay ahead of them. She thought of the other firework makers and how they welcomed her as one of them, and then she realised what she had learned. She suddenly saw that Dr. Puffinflash loved his pink fire, and Signor Scorsini loved his octopus, and Colonel Sparkington loved his funny moon people. To make good fireworks, you had to love them, every little sparkle or crackle dragon. That was it. You had to put love into your fireworks as well as all the skill you had. And Dr. Puffinflash's pink fire really was very pretty. If they combined some of it with a little glimmer of juice and some of that doubling back powder they'd never found a use for, they might be able to... She laughed and turned to Lalshan. "Now I see," she said. And so it was that Leela became a firework maker. The end. Well, I hope you enjoyed listening to me read this. I've enjoyed reading it. I hope everyone's staying well and safe. See you now. Bye.